Without further ado, I want to get the festivities rolling. The first organization we're going to call up, we're going to ask Robbie Worth, the president of TLPA, and Al Lagasse to join us and give us an update on the Taxi, Limousine, and Paratransit Association's activities for the last year and what's going on in their neck of the woods. Robbie and Al, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
My name's Al Lagasse. I'm the CEO of TLPA. TLPA, Taxi Cab Limousine Paratransit Association. We represent the owners and managers of for-profit, for-hire ground transportation fleets. Taxi, limousine, paratransit, airport shuttle, non-emergency medical, basically anything smaller than a bus. We're the only association in the world representing that full segment of the market. We have just over 1,000 members and operate just over 100,000 vehicles. I've been at TLPA, this is my 37th year. I've seen a lot in this business, but we've never seen anything like what's developed the last few years. And I'll just, for shorthand, you can call it TNCs, etc. I'll just call it Uber. So about 2.5 years ago, we realized what Uber was up to with Uber Black and Uber SUV. And you have to recall, these services are commercially licensed drivers, commercially licensed vehicles with primary commercial auto liability insurance. So it's a reasonably legitimate service. The only thing is, of course, you can't advance reserve Uber Black and Uber SUVs, so they didn't meet the advanced reservation requirement of a limousine license, and they operated more as taxis. But those were fine points that would have been worked out over time. Then Lyft came along, operating with unlicensed drivers and vehicles that are not commercially licensed and not carrying primary commercial auto liability insurance. When Lyft started operating in really just 2 cities, San Francisco and Seattle, although Uber wasn't much bigger at that time, Uber in April 2013 issued their infamous regulatory ambiguity proclamation, which basically said that if Lyft opened in a community and the community didn't hold them accountable to their regulations within 30 days, then UberX would also open because they didn't want to be put at a competitive disadvantage. So they recognized that the service was illegal, it didn't comply with regulatory and public safety requirements. And so they're saying their justification for breaking the law would be, if this other company's allowed to break the law, then we will do it also. Of course, what's developed since April of 2013 is that Uber has opened UberX service, this unlicensed service, in dozens of communities that have instantly said, you are not properly licensed, you are not operating legally, cease and desist, and they have chosen to ignore that. So I would argue they're ignoring their own proclamations. So it was just a rationale for breaking the regulations. So I think it's fair to say, going back to that proclamation and how things were operating back then, that regulators, transportation operators, our vendors, our consultants, all thought this was a legal issue, that the law would catch up with this unlicensed service and hold them accountable. In which case, Uber SUV, Uber Black, Uber Taxi would survive and continue to operate within the rules, and UberX and Lyft and their ilk would disappear. With 2020 hindsight now, we're a couple of years down the road, we've learned that we were all wrong. This is not a legal issue. And Uber was actually first to say this is a political issue. They've hired a campaign manager, a literal campaign manager. And this is a public policy, it's a political debate, much more than a legal debate. And that caught us off guard. Not the political debate didn't catch us off guard. What caught us off guard was politicians willingly saying that a driver, given the whole history we have of this industry, a driver can drive without a proper law enforcement background check. Vehicles can operate without a proper mechanical check. You can use a device to calculate a fare that no one's no one on the outside has ever tested to see if it's the least bit accurate or it works, when all other devices in the industry are highly regulated. That when you can't meet demand, you simply raise the price to give people to avoid your service so that you can say you didn't have a shortage of service, and you get the ancillary benefit of extra profit during those hours. Most important of all, we really could not fathom politicians saying it's okay to be unsafe. You don't need proper insurance. You don't need primary commercial auto liability insurance. So, you know, for those of us who have been in this field for a long time and we've seen the public safety issues, which are very real, I think we have a problem understanding that politicians don't see it quite the same way. So Uber, and this is all, do a Google search of news, you'll find all this. They've been accused of kidnaps, of rapes, hostile physical assaults, of unwanted sexual assaults, drivers who are unlicensed, uninsured, and I don't mean not a commercial license, I mean zero license, no driver's license whatsoever, driving vehicles that are totally unsafe. There are plenty of reports of this. And if you're an Uber supporter, you would say, well, all of that exists in the taxi cab, the highly regulated taxi cab industry, which would be absolutely true. However, we transport 2 billion passengers a year. We're in 2,000 communities, and that's just the United States. I'm not talking worldwide, I'm talking the United States, 2,000 communities, 2 billion passengers a year. They're, after 5 years, they're now in 106 US communities, most of which only for the last few months. I mean, they do not have widespread experience yet. They're very secretive about their data. We have no clue how many passengers they've transported, but I think a fair guess is millions, tens of millions, probably tens of millions. I'll be quick. So the percentage, what they've done in their entire history doesn't begin, it's not a fraction. I mean, it's an infinitesimal fraction of what we do in 1 year. So yes, we have people who get through the cracks, who do bad things, even with all this public safety regulatory environment in place to make sure they don't do those bad things. But that Uber has had so many of these with so few trips does not bode well for them. So, to shorten my presentation, the bottom line is there are some benefits. I mean, we should look at their model. There are some interesting aspects of what they're doing, and we should take the best of it. But the denial of public safety, which is where they make their profit by not having what we would call proper insurance, by not doing what we call a proper criminal background check, by not doing what we would call a proper mechanical inspection, all of those are very serious, and they should not be allowed to put the public at risk by avoiding the cost of meeting those services. And it's incumbent on you, the regulators, to find a way for the legitimate industry to continue to meet those regulatory requirements in as quick a way, because the battle now is for drivers. So you need to process licenses quickly, but safely, and the cost has to come down. There's no cost to breaking the law, there's a cost to complying with the law. You need to help our costs come down so that we can compete with those who don't incur our costs. So, and as we talk the rest of the week and in the debate, I think these things will come out. I wanted to introduce to you our president, Robert Worth. He's primarily a paratransit operator, although he was a taxi operator for many years. Paratransit's a different business, although Uber has announced they're opening a wheelchair service, at least in one community. And Robbie has great expertise, great knowledge, and has led our effort this year, which is a 24/7 effort on this new enterprise that we're doing. Robbie?
Well, this year has certainly been a very interesting and challenging year for our industry on all levels. Believe it or not, we do have other issues in front of us other than the U word. And My family, I come home at night and they say, "Dad, can you not talk about Uber?" And I said, "Nope, won't happen." So, you know, we've been in a fight now for pretty much 2 years, and this year has been very, very intense, and we've made some strides. And we've had some setbacks. You can only imagine if you go to bed one night and you got a cease and desist order in Virginia, you're feeling pretty good about yourself, and wake up the next morning and you find out that Uber has raised $1.2 billion, and that's with a B, in dollars to fight you. So we do have a website. And we do have an ongoing effort to present what we feel is the truth in this matter, because we feel that our opponents in this epic battle are going around the corners, so to speak, and giving the public the true information. That website is Who's Driving You? A lot of our press releases are on there. A lot of information on articles that are going around, carrying around the country are on there, and you can actually go on the website and give your viewpoints and opinions. We heard earlier in the conference from Greg Serio concerning the insurance. There is no doubt in our mind, and there should be no doubt in your mind, that our industry requires 24/7, 365 insurance. It's the only way that we can protect the public. And we know from industry statistics that a large majority of the accidents happen without a passenger in the back seat, especially when you are going to surge pricing on New Year's Eve. You will have a buzz of activity in the so-called rideshare industry that will lead to more accidents. So it's imperative that the insurance issue and insurance questions are answered. And if products come up that the insurance industry is able to formulate in response to a new industry, then those same products should be made available to everybody to create a level playing field. We also heard about a topic that is near and dear to your association's activities, the PASS Act. I am here to tell you today that TLPA supports the PASS Act. We need it, we want it, and we've been right alongside of the IATR in getting fingerprinting for drivers, because without fingerprinting, we really don't know what the disposition of a driver is. And I know that from experience. I know that in my history of 30-some years, we've had drivers fall through the cracks through the same third-party vetting that Uber and Lyft are doing. So we really need to have that. When you go into cities in Washington D.C., for example, and the open entry system in Washington D.C. has hurt our efforts on Capitol Hill, because the nature of the regulatory efforts in Washington have a lot to be desired, and we go on Capitol Hill to argue, and they're used to the DC taxi cab model. That is not the model that we have been supportive of for over 30 years. An open entry model, a model that doesn't have accountability for taxi cab companies to operate communication systems that serve the entire city. But when you see Uber operating, they simply are not in the poorer sections of the city across the river in Anacostia. They are discriminatory towards their practices in providing public service in even our nation's capital. Finally, one thing that's always bothered me, when I first got in the industry in Alexandria, we bought a company and there was an African-American part of the community called the Burg in Alexandria. It's very prominent in the movie Remember the Titans. And I walked in and the dispatchers were taking the call slips and putting them in the wastebasket from the Burg. And I asked them what they were doing. They said, we don't serve that part of the city. I took the wastebasket, I dumped the calls back out on the table. I said, you dispatch these calls back out. And every one of those calls was dispatched back out, even though some of them were 4 hours old. And that ended in 1979, the discriminatory practice of a public service taxi cab company. And we are proud in our industry of serving all sectors of the city, all persons with disabilities. So I think that when you see how Uber operates, the fact that they are rating their riders leads to discriminatory practices. And this has to end. So we look forward to working with your organization. We are, of course, very emotionally involved in this. We are helping our membership not only in understanding what is happening to them on a local level, but also what we can do to improve our services and meet the new challenges ahead for our industry. Thank you.
Once again, thank you for your support of the PASS Act. We are very, very pleased and happy that you've been there with us at Capitol Hill many times to help us. Next, I'd like to ask Dr. Ray Mundy, a friend and colleague from the Airport Ground Transportation Association, to give an update about what's going on at the airports and what's going on with your group. Ray?
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. I do have a presentation. I'm also an academic, so I always have a PowerPoint, but we're not really going to use it. The only purpose of the PowerPoint is to show you that we are updating pretty much what goes on with respect to TNCs, as I used to say, in the valley. When we had the joint meeting in St. Louis a year ago, I sort of depicted airports as standing on the hill and watching this battle going on, and it has raged quite a bit. We have, in most cases, operating authority to regulate taxi cabs, vans, everything that comes onto an airport. In other cases, we just have permitting ability. But we're going to exercise that ability. We are, I don't know if we're signature to the PASS Act or not, but obviously we would support it because we already do it. We already fingerprint most people that come onto the airport, that work at the airport, and especially in the commercial ground transportation era, given some of the incidents that we've had. Let me just find a clicker here first. Somebody walk away with a clicker? Don't seem to have one up here. You have a clicker? Jason, never used it. Well, I'll tell you what, let me just, take the time, let me just go through this report that's available to you, and then I'll really talk just a few issues well ended here. But this PowerPoint was presented last week at our meeting in Phoenix, and trust me, while I tried to have some items that were not TNC related, it was difficult. Airports are very, very interested, concerned, as well as our operators, in what way this issue is going to go. And we will survey about every 6 months, our operators and our airports as to who is doing what. Let me just report the long and short of it. I tell you what, why don't you just kind of flip through this a little bit at a time, and I'll talk as that's going on. We survey about half the airports in response, and today, if you're getting a 50% response rate on any questionnaire, you know, people are deeply interested in it. In this case, we also put a checkpoint for just too sensitive to answer at this time. A third of our operators, or I should say a third of our airports, reported on many of these issues that it was just too sensitive for them to even consider responding at this time. This report is both available in PowerPoint form and also a complete written report as to how airports are reacting to the advent of TNCs. And I do share Al's comment earlier, and I've only been in the business probably close to 40 years. If you'd have told me 2 years ago or 3 years ago that we would be allowing personal cars to be used in this industry without a background check, without commercial liability insurance, I would have said, no, those are called gypsies, and we usually take care of them. Regulators in cities have a hard time trying to chase them down. At airports, it's a confined environment, we know who they are, we just as soon shoot them as the only way, but they won't allow us to do that. We have other ways of getting rid of our gypsies. But this is a whole new sort of thing. We're not talking about ones and twosies and so forth. Airports are very concerned about how they're going to try to accommodate hundreds, if not thousands. If you were in Seattle a few months ago, talking to the city council, and the lift officer got up and said, well, we were not yet legal. We've only been operating here for 2 months, and we've already signed up 3,000 drivers. So airports are very concerned about taking what they have, in most cases, a fairly efficient loading system into on-demand taxi cabs, and now trying to service ones and ones, pre-arranged ground transportation. So we're very, very concerned about how we physically might handle that. But airports to date, and I think maybe Nashville may have been the first one to actually permit a TNC. We're not really sure. That was supposed to be done this week, but Uber hadn't signed the agreement. As far as California goes, and if anyone's heard me talk wearing another hat, either in the consulting side or the university side, I have always given the advice, slow this thing down. Let California Kool-Aid drinkers experiment with this for a while and see what happens after a year or two. We don't want to roll this across the country without knowing what kind of impact we're having, and especially the safety issue. I find it just impossible to believe that grown politicians, so enamored with their offices that they want to keep them, will actually put aside safety of the public and the public's interest and say it's all right to operate with just your personal insurance. Everybody in this industry that knows anything about taxi cabs, limousines in the area know that the best drivers and all drivers have personals. They're going to eliminate that 20% take of Uber or anybody else and develop somebody they're going to pick up every day or go on an airport trip. They all have them. And there is no question, even the insurance people I can get to speak about it, that personal trip is not covered. It's not covered to the driver, it's not covered to anything, and if an accident happens when you're on personal, kiss your car, your wealth, your house, goodbye, because you have no coverage whatsoever. Why insurance companies aren't stating this explicitly, sending out warnings, I do not know, but I guess maybe I do know, and I'm a little discouraged about the political process. Let me just forget about the PowerPoint here. Don't worry about that. The issues that airports have is the fact that we no longer can depend upon the regulatory ability of those people in the valley. We literally have to not be adverse to TNCs. We will embrace TNCs. But you have to be careful when an airport embraces, because we are public facilities, but we have basically support ourselves. So TNCs, they are telling them in most cases, we welcome you if you're legal in California and Colorado. But you're going to get in line with respect to our pre-arranged ground transportation. Whether it's an app or anything else, it's pre-arranged ground transportation. There are rules and there are regulations here. And those regulations call for a complete police background check. Those regulations call for commercial liability insurance, naming the airport as also co-insured. And that's the problem that airports and TNCs are having right now. If we change that model for the TNCs, and there are more hoops for the drivers to go through, there is more, I would say, upfront monies they have to pay in order to have commercial liability insurance, then we begin to level the playing field. What we did have come out of the meeting last week was the fact that our ground operators, they're not waiting. They are looking at what's happening, and in those states that permit the TNCs, you may find the yellow taxi suddenly becoming yellow TNC. We have some experiments going on, I should say, some areas of the country where certain taxi companies are also developing what's known in the trucking industry when they deregulated as double-breasting. They have a taxi company and they have a TNC company. Wherever this thing settles out with respect to insurance, background checks, we're going to have pretty much uniformity. If taxi cabs find that they are not going to be able to compete with the flexibility and lower cost model, then they're going to adopt that lower cost model. Frankly, I'm concerned about where that lower cost model is going. Well, let me just end this by saying that we have other problems at airports. And we do want to work with communities. We do want to solve some of these issues, but this whole thing of, I call it California ride sharing, and it's anything but ride sharing. I'm old enough, I worked on the ride sharing programs, I worked with insurance companies for carpooling and van pooling, and we were basically able to get those within the confines of personal automobile insurance, but there's nobody going to want them to be running a taxi cab operation under that ride sharing umbrella that was forged years ago. It's totally not ride sharing. And blow past the so-called smoke and mirrors of the app is just the latest in technology. We used to have to go to a stand, we then went to telephones, we went to the internet, we went to the cell phone, and this is just one step further in technology. It is the business model, folks. Look at the business model and see how that's changing our industry here in ground transportation. We've gone through deregulation before. This one is different. It's different because we are not bringing in new operators under the regulations that exist. We're bringing in new operators under a vastly different model. Every time, whether it's the 1930s, the 1960s, the 1980s, that we've deregulated, we've ended in chaos. I'm predicting it. I'm just saying, gee, if you're a historian, you look at this, and you look at the problems that we had in the 30s, why we started regulating anyway. You look at what happened in the 70s when we deregulated, we re-regulated within 5 to 10 years. There is something about this industry where the bad operators seem to drive out the capital of good operators if it's left to simply chaotic means. Airports have defended themselves by having concession agreements where that is typically taking place. Doesn't mean that airports can't work with open systems. We have a great example in one of the largest airports in the country, in North America, LAX, 6,000 to 7,000 taxi cab dispatches per year. Open entry to the airport. You only serve it 1 out of 5 days, and there is a closed entry to the city. So if the city can work with an airport, and the airport can work with them, we can have a system where all can participate, but it takes a lot of cooperation. So let me just end by saying airports are still standing on the hill saying, okay, TNCs are one thing, now we got people that want to arrange to have your personal car, they will take you to the airport, you park with them, and they just rent your car out. I don't know what we're calling that, but it's another California innovation, if you will, a new technology. We're also concerned with all these off-airport parking companies that are now trying to use the hotel and vacant space, or any vacant space, and running off-airport parking operations. Airports are there primarily to be self-supporting, and we basically want to embrace anybody who wants to serve our airports, but we want them to meet the standards that the airports have developed. So that's our update with respect to airports. We'll continue to monitor it. We expect certain permits to be developed within the next 6 months. but we also, as a group, want to make sure that the public safety is maintained at all times. Thank you.
The next person I'd like to introduce is my friend Dr. James Cooper. You may see James has been around the IATR for many years now, and he's going to give us an update not just on, I guess, our fact book, which we're very, very, very excited about and serious about completing this year at the IATR. He's a member of our academic research committee, and he's the chair of it, and he's been doing great work with IATR, but also, most importantly, the IATR has become very involved with the Transportation Research Board over the last couple of years. And you know, through a tremendous amount of efforts by James and also friends like Ray and at TRB who've been involved for years, we were able to get a paratransit, as part of the paratransit committee, a taxi subcommittee. For the life of me, with all this disruption going on and how things, you know, people just violate the law and the regulations so follow, with all due respect to the TRB, I can't understand or imagine or comprehend how you just can't create a taxi committee. Please, just create it. You know, we're allowing people to run left and right and just violate laws, and that's okay, but I really think you should just create a taxi committee. It's absolutely ludicrous to me, with all due respect, that there's such a bureaucracy in a research board that we can't just create it. Please help us create it tomorrow. We need the research. There's no research that's being done until the last couple of years that's of any significance. Our intent is to change that so we have scholarly work that could benefit you, but we join you in that effort, James. We support you in that effort, and we'd love to hear an update from you on what's going on with all of that. By the way, James did a great session yesterday, and we have posters. We have a bunch of posters that were in the fact book session that we're going to be moving out to the general area. So for those who want to look at some papers that were published, they'll be out in the general foyer. Thank you. Thank you, James.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I will just touch on the fact book to start with. You will see on your tables a sheet of paper. If you are a regulator, I would ask you please to help us make your fact book even better by filling out that form and returning it before the end of this meeting. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Transportation Research Board. And if you haven't heard of the Transportation Research Board, that's a shame. The TRB is one of the US government National Academy of the Sciences of Transportation. It is an international body that addresses everything to do with transport, from the colour of concrete to paratransit and further. But I would also say TRB doesn't know about you. TRB has a great history which has excluded taxis. And this is a huge shame and a big gap. In the last 4 or 5 years, we have worked pretty hard to develop the idea that taxis can be a science. Taxis are actually part of transport. They are integral and need to be given the same amount of attention. And in the last 4 to 5 years, we have developed a standing taxi subcommittee. I share Matt's sentiment, but I wouldn't use the same words in front of the TRB. We are seeking to move this further forward to give taxis the same, no more, no less, but the same standing as any other form of transport, which is where you belong. And in the last 4 to 5 years, we have achieved some element of success. We've had a series of research papers presented, which has increased in number year on year to quite a good set of papers, a large number of papers this year. We have over 32 taxi papers, taxi-oriented papers. We have a taxi workshop, which I invite you and require, please, your assistance with. Taxi workshop, let me just start with one thing blank. Transportation Research Board has an annual meeting, which is a wonderful event in Washington, DC. regularly achieves audiences of 12 to 13,000 people. It is not small. This January, it starts on January the 11th, which is a Sunday, with a taxi workshop. We have a very, very good group of people joining us to talk, to present, to discuss, and I would hope that those of you who can will join us in Washington, D.C. on the 11th of January in the conference center. We have potentially two taxi research sessions, that's podium sessions with papers on the subsequent dates. And they deal with taxi models, which might sound a bit boring, but they deal with research on apps. They deal with research in the areas that are becoming significant. They are producing a worldwide experience of taxi-based analysis and research that should assist, should provide information, and should challenge. And more than anything, research is there to challenge. Research is there to provide not just an alternative view, but a fact-based alternative picture for you to come and talk about. And the future needs your input as well. I'll touch very briefly. We are seeking to move to a full standing committee, and that needs your support. But most importantly, without the regulatory community and without the operator community, the research is poorer. Research is not addressing the needs that we need to present. We have new products, we have new concepts, we have new deliveries, but we need input from all of you as well. And I'm going to close just by touching on two further connections. You will see people in this audience who are from the TRB, who are looking specifically at new application-based products. I would urge and encourage you to engage with Bruce Shanna and his colleagues. I would urge and encourage you to engage with TRB. It's a proud link that the TRB has to the IATR, but it needs to be stronger. I'll touch on a final link to the Taxi Research Network. We'll hear from my colleague who will be presenting our Amsterdam meeting shortly. And the Taxi Research Network website, where you can have a complaint and a moan and tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about at any stage that you wish. So ladies and gentlemen, I encourage you to be in Washington, D.C. on the 11th of January from about 9 in the morning for a conference presentation that is almost as exciting as the IATR. Thank you for your time.
Well, I don't know, is the TRB going to be having people on stilts and clowns? And, no. But actually, you know, I don't mean to say anything, I don't want to be misunderstood about the TRB, James. I mean, the TRB is a wonderful historical organization, and you know, Catherine, we have you representatives here really for the first time at our invitation. So we want to work with you, and we're hoping that, I guess, the urgency with which this project is taking on for the industry will result in the leadership of the TRB looking at taxi studies as a whole and trying to expedite the approval of the committee. You have 100% support for that committee as an organization. It's something that we want. We have our own academic research committee. We have you know, a whole bunch of professors from the UTRC in New York, University of Missouri. We have people who have been doing the research, and we even have an IATR research agenda that we work with James on at the TRB subcommittee. So I'm hoping that you know, when we meet with the board, we can discuss how we can advance this agenda. It's very, very important to all of us, really. But thanks for the TRB for showing up and attending our conference for the first time. Now I'd like to, as we wind down our breakfast, introduce a friend of mine from Europe, who you may see as a fixture at our conferences. He's moonlights taking photography on our behalf as well. He's the tallest one in the bunch as well. Vim Faber is a very good friend, and for several years now he's been with the Taxi Research Network that we're a part of, been holding a conference in Amsterdam every year, which is attended by some IATR people. And we always learn a lot. We have an expo that the industry holds, and this year we're doing it once again. So I'd like to invite Vim, who's been really our European connection and our European voice and extension of the IATR in Europe. And we thank you for also not just gathering interest and helping us get regulators from Europe and beyond to join our group, but also for co-hosting the conference with us every year in Amsterdam. So without further ado, Vim Faber.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you all hear me like this? Yes. Yeah? Okay. I just wanted to show you new horizons. I'm going to entice you to come to Europe. James Cooper has already mentioned something. With Peter Schenkman and James Cooper, I'm actually working on the Amsterdam conference, which is going to take place at the end of November, on November 27 and 28. But let me present you first some new horizons. Next please. A quick introduction to what I do. It must be clear from the little picture in the corner that I had early ideas of joining the taxi industry. However, failing to get a driving license made the driving part impossible. So I have become a journalist. I'm doing my own website called taxiintelligence.com, and I'm an editor of various taxi newspapers all over the world, mainly in Europe. And I report on taxi matters basically from Europe, from the States, from Australasia. Next please. I'm sure you all remember this foreign secretary. One of his statements was, when he got exasperated about who to contact in Europe if he wanted to make a deal in the foreign sector, he used to cry out, said, who the hell do I call in Europe? There's 28 member states. Who do I call? There's not one single number for Europe. Well, Mr. Kissinger, nothing has changed. There are now 28 member states. At his time, it was just 12. And those member states, and that's the interesting part of it, don't have anything to do with taxis. There's this thing in Europe called subsidiarity, where the member states of the EU have decided that matters that don't really need a EU deal, they don't cross borders, for instance, are held and sorted out at a national or a local level. So taxi is not an EU matter. And when I mention New Horizons, there's actually an interesting development going on. Actually, as we speak, there are meetings in Brussels being held at the EU level, because for the first time, next please, galvanized by the taxi actions, by the taxi demos at June the 11th, which took place all over Europe, and they were actually inspired by that particular TNC, which I won't name, because I'm getting sick and tired of having to type the capital O and having to mention it. It's really unfortunate that actually takes up so much time in what we do. It seems as all the things that we stood for as a trade, as an industry, have disappeared. The only thing we focus on is the discussion, what do we do with the TNCs? Okay, now the discussion, because of these European-wide demonstrations, which are quite unique, there's never been anything like it in Europe before, that led to an EU-wide consultation, which is actually held tomorrow in Brussels. Today there are preliminary meetings with stakeholders. But last week, there was also a meeting of international trade unions in the transportation sector who also made the TNCs one of their themes. That in itself is quite unique, that the trade unions, who are not very strong in the taxi industry in quite a few countries, take that initiative. So what is happening? EU-wide consultation, which is new. The EU might actually take, the EU Commission, which governs Europe, so to speak, might actually take a role in the discussion about TNCs. The trade unions are going to be very interested as well. But what is going to be very interesting, and I'm sure that Mr. Runov, who you'll hear later at the meeting about, discussion about apps, Mr. Runov of the RU is going to tell you more about the global taxi network, which is being developed by the International Road Transport Union. The IATR also closely works with the RU in developing alliances in the taxi world. The RU has actually developed a network of apps which it hopes will work together within the taxi industry, with members of the taxi industry, to form a strong alliance and an interoperability of particular apps. So that when you use a particular European apps, this app will be usable in the States or in Australia and will actually minimize the attractiveness of the, let us say, the out-of-industry apps. So there are large alliances being built at the moment in Europe. There are now two large blocks. One's called ECAB and the other is Taxi EU. And these particular alliances are actually allowing the interchange, the interuse of these apps. There is lots to talk about, but what I would like to do is invite you, to the Taxi Expo update, which is going to be held at 27th and 28th of November. I know that it's not a really convenient date, but it's very difficult to find a good date in the international calendar, and especially as we're linked to a trade show in the Netherlands called Taxi Expo. It actually made our room to maneuver quite small. But I would really like to invite you to come to Amsterdam and join the discussion, especially as this year, for the first time, the Taxi Expo update, which is an English language international conference, now runs for 2 days. You might recognize a few people on those photos. It's quite a specialist conference. It has about 130 to 150 specialist taxi people, consultants, regulators from all over the world. And it has a high networking capacity. I mean, there's lots of time set aside for networking, and there's lots of time to talk to your peers and other people in the industry. One more slide. There are lots of reasons to come to Amsterdam besides our conference, but let me assure you that the conference itself is worth coming to Amsterdam for. But there is room outside the conference, there is a weekend that follows the conference, and there are great places to visit in Amsterdam. And you're very, very welcome. Hope to see you in Amsterdam. Thank you very much.